Good morning. Thank you, Scott, for having me. Claire, Wendy, thanks for having me. I know we're running late. This will only take 2 hours, so settle in. All right, I have a couple promises before I dive into the main part of my talk. One is that I won't be talking about retention, churn, stickiness, or emotional hooks, I promise. None of the heinous business speak here. But also, I have to implicate myself. So I promise you to hit right in the middle. The confused zone. But it's good. In a state of confusion, we find our way, right? So no heinous business speak, but complete and utter confusion. Let's commence. So, as Scott mentioned, I teach at Parsons, the new school for design in New York City. And that's my Twitter handle, in case you guys are tweeting. So I run a lab at Parsons called PETLab. I also have a PETLab. Yes, her name is Iggy Pup, and she is Satan. Anyway, I run a lab there called PETLab, and we do a lot of different kinds of projects, but I would say mostly the projects that we do are related to games for learning or games for some form of civic engagement, social change, that kind of thing. So, Reactivism is a game that we made about the history of activism, uses mobile phones, and you run around the city. Man Ahead of the Game is about urban ecologies. Yay! We have one fan for Man Ahead of the Game. Well, maybe one person has actually played that game. Budget Ball, which is a fiscal sport about the most compelling topic you can make a game about, the federal deficit. Wake up. It's played actually every year on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Between members of Congress and college undergraduates. The goal of the game is to kind of create and raise awareness, create a big spectacle around the federal debt. The college students are running, I always forget, is it 0 for 1? Anyway, they're winning, they've won. Currently, I'm doing a lot of work with the American and International Red Cross, Red Crescent. We're making games for climate disaster-related preparedness. So I'll talk maybe a little bit about that. And then also, Activate is a curriculum and game design that we made. PETLab. I also, outside on my weekends and evenings, spend my time working with different designers and artists. I'm a member of the Leisure Collective with Eric Zimmerman, who's here in the room. Yesriel, Michael Sweet, John Sharp. We're working on a game right now about May 1968 in Paris. So keep an eye out for that. Will be done in about 15 years. As Scott mentioned, I also am a member of Local Number 12, the Union of Design and Play. I have to say that our Twitter account we just got followed by the Republican Party. I think it's pretty interesting. We are a union, so. We've made the metagame, and I'm going to actually show that, so I'm not going to talk too much about it right now. And I'm working currently on an iPad game, a 2-player iPad game. In my spare time, I dabble in programming. I actually have an unfinished degree in computer science, but I sort of flunked out, so. All right, the metagame. How many of you would consider yourselves gamers? Yes! Okay, I'd like 2 volunteers, gamers, to come up to the front. Come on. And right here. Come on up front. Yes! Give them a hand. It's before 9 a.m. and they're Amazon or through our website. It's a deck of cards, collectible cards, that represent, that have video games on them, okay? And then there's another part of the deck that has questions, like which is more realistic? Or over here you see which is more frustrating to play, which is more tragic, okay? So the basic element of the game is about debate. But like any deck of cards, you can play all kinds of games with it. The metagame was at the Game Developers Conference this year, so we did a massively multiplayer, 25,000 player version of the game. Or you can play parlor-based games around the table at home, or all kinds of things. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do the basic duel. For that, each of you get 5 cards. Let's cut the cards. I did shuffle them this morning. Okay. Go here. I'll just put them here. This is totally live, people. This is happening.
Do we get to peek?
You got 5. Okay, yes, now you get to look at your cards. Here's the good part. I'm going to shuffle this again. Completely unscripted. All right. You will be cut in half as well if you're Okay. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to select the top card here and read the comparison. And what you're going to do is choose the card in your hand that you think would win an argument, a debate about this particular question. And then you'll each have 1 minute to make your case. All right? You ready? And then the audience, you guys listen carefully. You will choose who is the most persuasive. All right. So the comparison today is which is more realistic. Take a moment. Take a look at your cards. Okay. All right. Okay. Who would like to go first? Do we have a
ladies first?
Okay. If you want, is the podium mic mic'd or on? Maybe you can go, or you can speak into mine.
I describe why it's more realistic.
Which is more realistic? Yes. So you describe why your
realistic
game is the most realistic game.
Okay.
And you have 1 minute.
All right. I would say that Final Fantasy VII, the most realistic game, because it's just like life in that all kinds of shit can happen. And also, just when you start to think that you're figuring out how things are going to work, the rules change a little bit. Let's see. You can, just like life, you can do-overs when things didn't work out exactly the way you intended. And how am I doing on time?
You're good. You don't have to fill up the whole minute.
In addition to that, it's always just like life, always fun to be surrounded by people who have glue in their hair.
Repeat the question specifically.
Which is more realistic? You want to come up to the amplification?
I'm not a podium guy, but I'll pretend.
You can do it.
I'm going to choose Little Big Planet.
Excellent.
And I think it's more realistic because we're all a bunch of floppy socks getting knocked around by strange monsters and walls and spaceships and have no idea where we're going. But we get to design our own futures. We get to make our own spaces and play and explore. We get to have infinite ways to reinvent where we are and how we interact with the world around us and cooperate, or choose to go off and have time alone to think and be our own person and then reach out once again.
All right.
I'm done.
I just totally blanked out. Your name again?
Stacy.
Stacy. And Daniel.
Yes.
Okay. So we heard from Stacy, Final Fantasy VII, and Daniel, Little Big Planet. We're all socks. So we're going to do an applause-o-meter. All right. Let's hear it for Stacy. And Daniel. Man, that is close, but I think I heard a little bit more hoot and hollering for Final Fantasy VII. Stacy. Excellent. Woo! Man. Let's just play this for the next half hour. All right. Thank you so much. So the metagame, actually this relates to my talk a little bit, but we'll get there later, so just give me a moment. We also have a culture edition where you can argue about which has been more influential, Big Mac or Marcel Duchamp's Fountain. Anyway, so that's the metagame. I'm going to be weaving through some comparisons in my talk, and you're all going to play a different version of the metagame I call Keynote. So, keep your wits about you. All right. So first off, I have taken a vow this year. My vow is to make no more games for learning. I'm quitting. Instead, I'm going to focus on learning for games. See, isn't that tricky? And what I mean by that is that instead of starting with a product, a noun, thing, game, I'm going to really focus on learning and what that means, and think more about kind of what kinds of forms learning can take related to games, but not just necessarily a game that teaches something. So what I ultimately mean is learning for making games, for appreciating games, and for understanding games. So this is going to be my mission for the foreseeable future. Some of you might know that I, in addition to taking this vow, have agreed to volunteer my time to help write national standards, educational standards, K through 12. I know nothing about this. I'm a university professor. We don't have any standards. At all. As you can tell. But I'm writing national standards with a group of really, really smart school teachers, about a dozen of us, for a new discipline in the arts called media arts. For those of you who may not know, within K through 12 standards for the arts, we have dance, performance, music, and visual art. Those are the 4 disciplines. So we're adding the thumb, 5th. Media arts, which includes everything from animation and film to interactive media to games. So games will be taught in art classrooms if we do our job right. So, yeah. Woo! I'm excited. Okay, we got 2 people who are also. All right. So that's one way in which I've kind of decided to spend my time. It's not compensated at all. I'm going to Dallas next weekend, which sounds exciting or scary, depending, to work with a group to write up these standards, and I'm learning a lot. So I want to start with the theme of this conference. The mobile revolution has not only changed the tools of play, it's changed the rules. And here we go, this is our first meta keynote. Talking about revolution here. Which is more likely to incite a revolution? Toy Story or Dance Dance Revolution, right? Okay, so now here's how you play. If you get it right, see, so every metagame argument I make is always right. So basically there's one right answer. And if you get it right, you get a point. And by the end of the talk, you have the most points, you win. Which is more likely to incite a revolution? Let's see hands for Toy Story. Okay. Let's see the hands for Dance Dance Revolution. Oh, okay. Dance Dance Revolution is a clear favorite amongst the group. The answer is Dance Dance Revolution! Although I would say that Toy Story has that potential. There's a great book that I really have been enjoying by Judith Halberstam called The Queer Art of Failure, which is all about Pixar films and other kinds of cartoons that have embedded within them revolutionary messages. And Toy Story itself being about the collective and breaking down the notion of sort of the nuclear family or something like that is kind of a revolutionary concept and idea. So I think it's interesting that revolutionary ideas are actually most found in children's media, right? And they can be embedded and sort of hidden inside there. But Dance Dance Revolution, of course, is a game. And games are much better at inciting a revolution than movies. And also, certainly when we talk about the kind of notion of like sort of getting up in front of an audience and dancing, we're really talking about that ability to express yourself, and I think ultimately expressing yourself is part of learning to be a citizen and to revolutionize things. So this is what the mobile revolution looks like. Wow. If I can't dance to that revolution, so a lot of the stuff that we've seen in the last couple of days kind of looked like this, although maybe more like this, right? This is, I guess, a little self-promotional, I'm realizing as I'm showing this now. This is this project that I worked on through PETLab and with some anthropology students and design students called Reactivism. And it uses phones in a slightly different way. It uses phones to actually document and record moments of protest and activism that are recreated in the spots where they once occurred. So this is a die-in from commemorating some of the ACT UP protests down on Wall Street. And then they decided to write wiretapping is unconstitutional, so it's sort of a mashup of activist moments. But the interesting thing about the game is that nobody learns the history of activism in this game. It failed miserably. Because ultimately what you end up doing is racing from site to site. We play this with middle school students. We do this every year on election day when kids are out of school and they come over to Parsons and they play this crazy game. But because you're racing from site to site, you don't stop. There's little cards about each site. You don't really stop and read about that, right? So games, I don't think, are very good at conveying content. But ultimately, there's this sort of stealth learning in the game, which is how do you use a mobile phone to document what's going on around you and share it? It's part of the game is to prove that you've actually reenacted these moments, and so you have to record them. So I think when we think about mobile technologies and revolution, we might want to rethink what we need, right? And think about the affordances and power of mobile phones as a device that does more than just deliver content. This is a photograph taken at the last time we ran Reactivism. It was in Philadelphia. Penn actually had a year of games for their. It was amazing. Like wow, that's awesome. We all need a year of games. And so we did this for freshman orientation. We had students play the game, and ultimately they ended up connecting up with the actual Occupy protests. And it was really interesting and sort of kind of taught me to think about also context and what happens around the game, not just in the game. So there's this other kind of interesting thing about mobile and mobile phones, which is that it's, you know, this notion that it's changed the rules, again, from the description of this conference and what we're focused on. And it certainly has changed the rules in certain ways. The first piece of technology I had when I was a kid was this. This is an Atari 400. It was sort of a step down from the 800, but a step up from the 2600. The math doesn't work. But and it was the best thing I ever got, because you could, do you see what cartridges inside there?
Basic computing.
Wow. Basic! You could actually get a cartridge with Centipede on it, which is awesome. But you could also get a cartridge with Basic, and you would plug it in, and you could, it was impossible. I had calluses on my fingers, this sort of membrane keyboard that was supposed to keep you from spilling stuff in the device. Typing really close to the television, I'm surprised my eyes work still. It cost, at the time it came out, November 1979, I was 10 years old, it cost $550. Right? I still have mine. I'm wondering how much it's worth today. But 500, it's the one thing that I've carried with me everywhere I've moved throughout my life. Just this Atari 400, just in case I need to make stuff in Basic. And I actually, 31 years ago, I learned how to make games. I made my first game on this machine. It was a text-based adventure, which took place in Jacques Cousteau's ship in his world. I wanted to be a marine biologist. Now I surf and make games, so it kind of connects, but not entirely. But the cool thing is that, I mean, it was expensive, right? And today we have a much cheaper device. It's much more portable. You can put it in your pocket. You can go anywhere. It's not that much cheaper, actually. Right? $500. How much is an iPhone these days? $399? Something like that? Yeah. Right. But there's no Basic cartridge. And there's not an app for that. There is not an app for that. Show me an app where you can actually make and distribute to your friends games. It's changed the rules. These devices have changed the rules. No longer can we actually make and share games. We used to carry mine to school on a cassette tape. Crazy, right? This is all like, some of you are like, whoa, what is this woman talking about? Because she grew up in the 1800s. Cassette tape. I know, I'm Gen X.
Gen X.
Not Gen Z or Y. Gen X.
Yeah.
We're wolves. We're wolves up here. Alright, so I love you guys. You're so good. It's changed the rules. Alright? I think it's time for us to change the rules back. That's really the theme of my talk. We can end now. But ultimately is that you can make a game on here. Right? This is cheaper than those little devices you put in your pocket. You can make a game there, Little Big Planet, you can share them. You can make games here. there's a great tool called, it's a Wario, God, I'm forgetting the name of it. WarioWare, where you can make these sort of really constrained short games. And this device is even less expensive. So that's my point about mobile. So, and it's basically that smartphones are not smart. So that's a hint for the next meta keynote. All right, which should be required in school? Half-Life, where you bludgeon aliens with a crowbar, or the iPhone. All right, you ready? Okay. Who says the iPhone? Oh, you're very astute. Some of you aren't listening, and that's okay. You got to do your email. You know. How many of you say Half-Life? Yes. All right. It's Half-Life. So, making games. You know, the thing about making games is that you know, a lot of historians of play talk about the nature of play. That play is natural. Right? We've been doing it forever. It's what creates culture. But I think what you don't hear as much, it's also natural to make games. Otherwise we wouldn't be playing them, we wouldn't have them. So there's something natural about making them too. And you know this, right? If you hang out on the playground, that's what you see. How many of you have like neighborhood rules for hide and seek? Or, yeah. Not only are you making games, you're modifying games that exist, you're passing them down to other generations. This is a game that's made with Half-Life by a student of mine. It's about all these things. And you can find these on a site called Radiator. It's the name of the series. It's arty. It really, I mean, so he took basically the Half-Life 2 tools, right, and made his own game from these tools. And it looks beautiful because you're just reusing, these are just reused assets and art that the people who made Half-Life already used, right? So you can make these incredibly sophisticated looking games by just modifying the tool itself, right? So I think one of the cooler things about this is that part of the game involves taking repressed memories, which are represented with crates. If you know Half-Life 2, you know that crates are a really important part of the game, and breaking them open. And you're in a marriage counseling situation. Repressed memories come out, and super fascinating. Anyway, the point is that you can't do that on a mobile phone, right? This is a great book. It just came out a couple of months ago, maybe a month ago, by Anna Empathy, who is a game maker. You might know her latest game, Dysphoria, which is about hormone therapy and her experiences. She has a lot of very sort of personal stories in games, or games are a storytelling mechanism for personal stories. It's a really inspiring book because it's about making games and just getting started. It actually has everything you need to know to start making games. So it's got all the little tools, it's all got all the tools listed, and it sort of gives you a sense of how to get started. And it's a really empowering, fabulous book because of that. I think that the games that we play today will be much more interesting when we're teaching kids how to make games in art class, not in science, technology, engineering, and math disciplines necessarily, but in art. Really taking ownership of games as an art form. But also, you know, this kind of encouragement, the sort of zine culture of making games. Project that I'm working on called Activate, and part of it is trying to encourage this idea that you can make a game, anybody can make a game. And the design process, which is iterative. I think just one thing you really learn, two things you learn when you're making games. That the first idea that you have is horrible. And then when you finally put it in front of someone and play test it, you realize that. And you need to go back and make changes. So that iterative process, right? If only standardized tests could be taken iteratively, everybody get an A. I think everybody should be able to do that. But also that it forces you to really think about other people. You have to be empathetic when you make a game, because you have to understand how well someone understands what you're trying to do, and if they can play it or not, if it's too hard or too easy. We took the curriculum to Abu Dhabi, like you do.
Ideas using various systems.
Right, I mean, the images, they don't know.
We don't have to listen to this part. But ultimately, one of the things that these guys are talking about in the movie is that the hardest part was playtesting. That was the hardest part, because they're like, oh God, yeah, people played my game wrong. They were wrong. I love that, right? At some point you realize, maybe it wasn't, maybe they were wrong. Although I'm always right with metagame, but. And these are the games they made, so they're horrible. They're the ugliest things you've ever seen in your life. They're like, the gameplay is one-dimensional, not that interesting to racing to this. But they made a game. And for many of them, this was their first game. And there's something really empowering about that. This one's really strange. So are these. This is about recycling, I think. All right. There's other kinds of tools too, like GameStar Mechanic, which Eric was part of in the beginning, and others of you are involved in. Alex Gomez, who spoke yesterday, did a really great set of studies on GameStar. So there's all kinds of tools out there. You can't get them on your mobile phone. This is a tool that I think is super interesting. This is called Game-O-Matic. It's part of a Knight Foundation grant between Georgia Tech and UC Santa Cruz. And August is involved, and Michael Mateus. This is one of Ian's games. So basically you take nouns, connect them with verbs. And what I think is really interesting, then you press play, and it makes the worst game you've ever played in your life. The computer makes the game, right? And it's usually you're trying to, if a person wants crunch, Doritos make crunch, but they hate granola. The granola makes crunch. So usually you'll make a game, and every time it'll make a slightly different game. One time you might be chasing after the Doritos, another time you might be trying to avoid the granola, right? And there's something really beautiful about this. It's going to be released very soon. He spoke about it at the Game Developers Conference this year. Ian August. But what's really cool about this is that, it kind of displays the system. It shows the system and it reveals it in front of you as you're making the game. So that's also part of, right? We talk a lot about playing games as a way to encourage systems thinking, but making them ultimately involves that too. So we'll go quickly through appreciating games. I don't know anyone who appreciates games more than this kid can. This is insane. If you don't know about Kane's Arcade, stop listening to me now, get your laptops out, check it out, the movie's awesome. Basically this is a kid in East LA he made his own arcade out of cardboard. And it is absolutely incredible. No one would come and play, but then there's a secret ending to the movie. I won't spoil it. So the idea is like, less apps, more cardboard. Do that. Yeah. Less apps, more tennis balls. This is another idea. Charles Pratt wrote a beautiful piece. He actually did this as part of a micro talk that Rachel Marshall and I ran at the Games for Change conference a couple of years back, where he talks about how do we make more games that are like tennis balls rather than tennis. So, we can do all kinds of things with them. This explains it well. So the greatness of tennis is actually tied in a very important way to the greatness of playing catch with your dog. I should have inserted another picture of Iggy here, but Minecraft is like a great tennis ball, right, in a lot of ways, because you can choose to play it either in the game mode or just the Lego mode, where you're creating things. This is Disney. Someone recreated, or a group of people recreated Disneyland in Minecraft. I'm going to go to this Disneyland. Cool. I myself actually play Minecraft in a particular way as a sort of flaneur. I go to different Minecraft worlds when I have a little bit of time, and I log into the servers, and I walk around until I get killed. And I'm not allowed back to that server ever again. I can never go back to that same world, even if it was cool. So part of it is just like, I just want to see what people have made and appreciate it and kind of spend. Usually it takes about 15, 20 minutes before I die. We won't go to the end there, but I die very soon. And then finally, understanding. Keynote moment! All right, everybody. Which is a better tool for dictators? Civilization 3 or Monopoly? This one's a little less, you may not know what the answer is. How many people say Monopoly is a better tool for dictators? Raise your hands. You all had little brothers or sisters who became complete dictators. You know that. Civilization 3, raise your hands. You win! Civilization 3! And I'll explain why. This is sort of a strange argument. So, Stone LeBrand gave a great talk at GDC this year as well. And he has created a game design curriculum that involves games. So it's games to teach game design. And you can download his slides. Actually, Eric turned me on to this and has been using it in some of his classes. I think it's really, really interesting. And there's a great section on probability. So we all know this, right? We know that there's a 50-50 chance if you roll a die, if you want, let's say 6 beats 5, 5 beats 4, etc., to win, right? So we all know that when we're playing dice. Civilization 3, however, does this. It uses loaded dice, right? So one of the interesting things, another talk at GDC, I guess I learned everything, it's like my school, it's my university, I go to once a year. Sid Meier, who created Civilization, the whole series, talked about how actual probability feels really unfair in a game. So if there's a 60% chance I should win this battle against another country, it feels really wrong when I lose 2 or 3 times. That doesn't feel fair. I have more than 50% chance of winning, right? So basically, the probability is fudged with so that the player feels like it's a more fair world, when in fact the dice are loaded. It's interesting, right? Like, what do we learn about probability when this happens? And I'm not saying that Civilization is a bad game because of this. It's not. It's just that if we can understand games, if we truly understand them, then we won't be this. We won't be the little, the panda bear, thinking that it's with his mother panda bear. But instead it's with someone in a panda bear suit. It's somebody in a panda bear suit. So, this relates, I gave a micro talk at GDC 2 years back and used this quote. This kind of relates to the idea that in politics we're not only dealing with a war on arithmetic, but we're dealing with a war on logic, right? So how do we become more logical and mathematical thinkers if we're softening the edges and doing these kinds of things? So understanding games basically means you can see behind that curtain, right? And you can understand how they're made. And there's nothing wrong with trying to create a better experience for players or making it more fair seeming, if you know that that's what's happening, right? So I think I'm just going to stop there. I was told that there's 5 minutes for question and answer. And ultimately, I guess what I'm trying to say is, less apps, more cardboard. Let's really think about not just making great games for learning, but thinking about learning for games. How do we sort of, help create a culture of games appreciation? Maybe metagame is part of that. $25. How do we create a culture where games are understood, where systems thinking becomes, Alex mentioned wisdom, systems wisdom, where we really understand what's going on? And how do we create a culture of making and creativity within that? So that's just the way I wanted to kick off the day, and thank you very much.
Question. Oh, come on. This opportunity doesn't happen very often.
Right, here we go. It's on your side.
On my side. My side. Right. I just want to clarify. So Sid Meier's tilts the game in favor of the player in order to make it feel more fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of. Probability, true randomness is super unfair, right? So he basically, from what I understood in the talk, he basically takes that true randomness and tries to make it seem more fair by essentially making like a 60% chance more like an 80% chance.
Is this related to marketability of the game? In other words, if you make it seem more fair, people are more likely to buy and play it?
I don't think so. Yeah, the question is this related to the marketability of the game? No, it's a design technique. It's actually, I don't even know if Sid Meier invented the technique, but his talk was really interesting because it revealed kind of behind the curtain what's happening in the game. But it really is a design technique. It's about creating an experience that seems balanced and fair for the player. Because, as I said, true randomness just doesn't, you don't understand it that way. It doesn't seem fair.
So, I'm trying to understand what you're saying in terms of modeling games, right? So one way that you could approach game design would be from the math, from a math angle. Is what you're suggesting here is just that the model is different, that the formula is different, that you're not looking at straight mathematical probability, but this fair probability, right? Is that kind of what you're suggesting?
That's a really good question, and I didn't finish the keynote. I did it earlier than I have a couple more examples, but so really what I'm not talking about math necessarily, but really about how we create a culture of better understanding of how games work, and knowing how they work, how to make them, how to appreciate them on a slightly deeper level than just, stickiness, buying apps, retention, churn, all those kinds of things that we've talked about here too, which I think are clearly directly important to our day-to-day jobs. Many of you are working in that field, but I think also, I guess I'm lamenting the fact that the mobile revolution is a revolution maybe in a way that discourages creativity and making, just by sheer fact of the way these devices work. And I'm focused on iPhones and Apple because it's a much more closed system than Android or some of the other ones. But also, if you learn something like this, like if you sit in these amazing talks that GDC has or have access to that, you realize that part of understanding the world is also understanding better how the games we make operate and work in that role. I don't know if that's clear, but I guess I'm being a little bit of an activist by just saying, let's take the tools of production ourselves, right? And and also make sure everyone has the ability to make games and understand them, and understand what they're doing better.
I mean, I think the Apple's closed system model is a problem, but also in some ways I think there's just a challenge here. How do we build a platform that's open? I mean, for instance, iBook Author is a free tool that people can make books and put them on for free, and you can build games inside there. And how can we build an app that maybe uploads to a web-served model where you could share and distribute apps that aren't through the Apple model? So a lot of this is how can we game the system to make games and make tools that people can make games with.
That's awesome. I never thought about iBooks. I'm going to make one. That is so excellent. Yeah, it's true. How do we game the system, right? How do we encourage this mode of creativity? I mean, in almost every form of media, right, we've shifted from consumption to production, or blurring the lines entirely, right? We're taking photos, we're sharing them, we're writing stories, that creative moment is really flourishing right now. I want to see it happen in games too, and on these platforms. So the iBooks idea is a really, really cool one. Brilliant.
This builds on that a little bit. When you had your Atari 400 and I had to walk down the street to my friend's house, who had the only computer in the neighborhood, which was an Atari 400, it was the only computational device we had access to. So you made something on that, and then you played it on that. And in the beginning, in fact, you could only play it on that computer. You couldn't get it to somebody else's. Now we're in a time where a smartphone might be one of many devices that someone has access to. So like in the example there with iBooks, you're not authoring that on an iPhone, but you might be authoring it for an iPhone. So how does that sort of ecology of tools that one might have access to sort of change the landscape? Because a smartphone really might be a great target platform, but it may not be a really great authoring platform for lots of different reasons. So how does that sort of ecology of technologies that someone sort of participates in the course of a day or a week sort of change that landscape of what they might use to author and what they might use to consume?
Right. You found the exploit in my argument, Eric. But no, it's I mean, Eric. So that's true. I hear a lot of people talking about mobile as more accessible, that more kids have access to these platforms than they do computers. So my question is, if in order to have an ecology, you really need to pay a lot of money for that ecology. And that would be the only thing I would say. Just how do we, I want us to really think about what this mobile revolution is, and what it means, and what we want these devices to be able to do. And yeah, there's some great tools for making apps, but ultimately the people who decide what will end up on the devices is still a closed, relatively gated system. So, but it is a good point. It is part of an ecology. Clearly we have a media ecology, a social ecology around media too.
Hi. I wonder if the culture hasn't changed a bit now that we've gone mobile, and sure, it isn't a democracy because you do have to pay for an expensive device, but there's no longer this stereotype of gamers. Like, gamers are your soccer mom, gamers are the people standing in line at the T buying pizza. Everyone is now a gamer. And I think that, you see a group like Moms with Apps. Okay, we don't have the device yet to make a game while we're standing on the T, but isn't that just the next step?
I hope so. That's why I'm talking about it here. And it's also why, 31 years ago, I mentioned I made my first game, and then I totally stopped because it was so uncool to be a nerd making games at that time. And now I think that stigma still exists in some ways. We do workshops in Activate all around the country and in other countries, and we realize that I don't understand why making games isn't like an obvious widespread activity. If making games is a natural thing we do in the playground, why not on these devices? And so, yeah, I'm digressing from your comment or question, but I think ultimately these phones have definitely made the notion of gamer sort of broken down that idea, and I think that's good. And maybe this is the next step. right? Anna Anthony's book talks about how housewives are taking a new art form and expressing themselves through it. So I think there is a next step there. I want to challenge all of us to think about not just making games for learning, but thinking about the kind of learning involved in making, understanding, and appreciating games. And to create a culture about that, of a more media literate, a more games literate.
There's one more question.
Hi, I was wondering if you had heard of Game Salad.
Yes, and actually the curriculum in Activate, we're starting to make tutorials in Game Salad right now.
Very cool. Yeah, I just think it's a really great tool that makes mobile development very accessible to kids. I think I'm not super familiar with it, but the last statistic I heard is that they've had over 1 million games shared now, and many of those are made by kids.
Yeah, Game Salad is a super easy to learn tool. It's great. There are a lot of really great tools out there for making games. Being able to put your game on in the App Store is another matter entirely. You have to be a developer and register and pay. But being able to make games for these devices is becoming much more open. And Game Salad's super easy and cool tool on those lines.
Okay, I know we could go on forever and we could sort of cancel everybody else and Colleen keep talking, but she's on the other side to answer more questions and our next speaker will get ready.